against the Secretary of State as well as the Registrar of Voters for Orleans Parish. Essentially, what we are asking in this mandamus is that the judge order the Registrar of Voters for Orleans Parish to give the recall effort an accurate number of active registered voters. Essentially, what happened here was through an investigation done in the recall, we were able to determine that thousands of people are still listed as current active voters in Orleans Parish. The majority of those have either died, have moved out of parish, but within Louisiana, but no longer in Orleans Parish, or out of the state of Louisiana. So we are at, somewhere around 25,000 people through just a general search in the database of people who are no longer should be considered active registered voters. And essentially, that's what we're asking the court to get the Secretary of State, who supervises the Registrar of Voters, to give us an accurate number, because obviously the recall is dependent upon that number in order to determine what is the 20% that is needed, what 20% of signatures are needed in order to be successful. So, and I'm going to let Eileen just give a brief statement about how this came to be necessary, and then I'll follow up with a statement, and I will take a couple of questions.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. This kind of started with social media the way Belden and I started. There was a post by a famous New Orleans brewery, and they said, I received 5 different mailers for 5 different people at my address, and none of them are me.
You want to start that again?
Sure. This started kind of how Belden and I met with social media and chatter. We received a post, and we're tagged in it, that they received 5 different mailers to their homes with 5 different names, and none of them were them. And New Orleanians thought it was a joke. But being that I'm in the recall, it wasn't a joke for us. And so we started doing some digging and found some irregularities, and so that led us to this. So.
And essentially what you'll see in the petition is that the database there are several databases that link up or essentially speak to the United States Post Office. Those databases all speak to each other so that the registrar can be informed if somebody has passed away. They'll be notified through the Louisiana Department of Health. They are also required to check obituaries regularly by state law. You will see that law laid out in the petition. Additionally, there is a national database for a change of address. If somebody puts a change of address form in, those databases again should speak to each other so that a registrar can send out that required mailer asking the person, where is your current residence, which you want to be listed as an active voter at. So what we found was the database is identifying thousands of people who are no longer at the residence in which they are listed as active voters. This database compiles over the course of about 35 years, is able to access information. So that's why we are seeing people who voted, who haven't voted in a decade, or people who passed away more than a decade ago, who are still listed as active registered voters. You'll see in the petition there is a person registered in Orleans Parish who is also registered to vote in Florida. These are just examples that we pulled out of where the database is essentially catching these mistakes, but the Registrar of Voters for Orleans Parish through the Secretary of State have failed to move those persons from active to inactive, and therefore the number that we have to use for the recall is inaccurate.
A couple questions. One, the petition talks about the Secretary of State not turning over the accurate record. Was there communication or just a flat-out denial? How did that go? And do you expect this lawsuit to have any impact on the deadline, the timing of filing the petition with the Registrar's Office?
So the Secretary of State is required by law to give the recall petition basically a certified document giving that number. They would be required to have given them that at the time that the recall petition is filed. That never happened. As a result, the recall effort essentially uses the information from the Secretary of State's website to attempt to get an accurate number. That number changed between August the 1st and September the 1st. So essentially, they thought they could rely on the information from the Secretary of State's website. But as you heard, when they start to get into this, sort of getting out their canvassing, sending out mailers, and they are learning, that's probably mine, and excuse me, when they get into this and start sending out mailers and canvassing, they are learning that there are inaccuracies in the system.
And then the second part on the timing, it's less than a week before when the signatures were to be turned in.
So I think that we can anticipate that there could be a request to sort of stop or stall the counting of votes until we have an accurate number to base that on. That would be the logical conclusion here. Nothing has been filed yet, but essentially we certainly don't want the Secretary of State using an inaccurate number when determining whether the recall effort has obtained the required number of signatures. So we need that number first before the counting can begin. But of course, as you can see in the petition, you know, deadlines have pushed this to move as quickly as possible, and that's why we pull as many examples as we're able to get quickly, but obviously we can't go through 25,000 before tomorrow.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it realistic? I mean, is it realistic to think the voter rolls could be scrubbed, get 30,000 names off before next Wednesday to get the number that the recall filers need by next Wednesday?
No, I don't anticipate that this will be fixed by Wednesday. And just to be clear, we're not asking for the list of voters to be scrubbed at all. This is really just an issue of who is considered active versus inactive. That's the key issue here in this mandamus. That is the key issue for the recall effort. It's not to remove everybody from a list of active or people who can vote in Orleans Parish. It's what is their status, because that's what the law requires us to use in determining the percent of signatures we need. So we do not expect to have an accurate number by Wednesday. I think it would be impossible to get those mailers out as she's required by law, to get a response from those mailers, or to canvass in time. That's why it may be necessary to restrain the Secretary of State from beginning the counting until we have a more accurate number that we can base this recall on.
You said that they never issued you guys a certified number, that list. Why file the notice now instead of when they, at first, when they never sent that list to you guys? Maybe that would have given you guys more time.
I think that there was not any expectation that the database was this far off. In other words, there was the belief that we could rely on the Secretary of State's website and the numbers that they produce on that website to base that 20% off of. So they relied on the information given on the website. It wasn't until they get into the canvassing and the mailers that everything starts coming back. Or as Eileen said, people are saying, hold on, I'm getting 5 at this one address, so how many people are considered registered voters at this address? And they're moving as quickly as possible. You have to remember, there's a lot of moving parts here in this effort. A lot of work has gone into it. So then they say, okay, what next? Let's consult with a company that does this for a living, essentially. Let's bring in a company that can tell me, how do you find out who's active, who's inactive, and where they are now?
Eileen, earlier this week, you said you were about 1,000 signatures short of your goal. Was that of 49,976, or is it of this lower number after thousands of allegedly inactive voters are tossed from the list?
Well, let me interrupt real quick, because we don't have a new number.
I was
So,
about to say that.
yeah, we don't have that new number. That's what we're asking
I was about to
for.
say
that.
So
So
we.
you were saying you were 1,000 short of 49,976, just to be clear.
Of that approximate number, but I want the real number. I need to know what
Correct.
it is. This isn't a joke. This isn't a game. This is real business, and we need to know what that number is.
So I just have a follow-up on process. So you turn in the signatures you have on Wednesday. What would it look like if the judge says, if you get your way and the judge has to stop the counting? How would that work? Would you ask for a resumption at days later, weeks later? Just explain how would that work?
I think that it would require some input from some of the parties involved, the Secretary of State. Sorry.
Start from the beginning, please.
I think that would require some input from some of the parties involved, the registrar, the Secretary of State, that the judge would consider to say, how long would it feasibly take to do this? Is it feasible for us to do this? And a judge can really order anything, so they can set it as long or as short as they want to.
Another question, if you're an active voter, you can still vote, but my understanding is you have to kind of jump through an extra hoop of signing a petition. Are you worried that if you succeed and some number of people are placed on the inactive voter list, that will make it harder for people to vote.
That really doesn't make it harder for people to vote according to the statute and the way it's laid out. It actually lays out step by step what you do if you're listed as an inactive voter. And for the most part, you can just go into the polling place, your precinct, and give them your name and address. And as long as all of that it can be verified through your license, then they will, the law says, basically, you are then replaced on the active voter list. And that's essentially, before that, you would, if you were placed on inactive, you would have got a mailer, okay? And you would have had to respond to that mailer by sending it back to the Secretary of State. This sort of would be the step of doing that without having to use the mailer. So, in other words, if you're inactive, you can still go in, and for the most part, most people can vote on that exact day, given if they follow the requirements of the statute. It actually takes some effort to get totally removed from the voter list. And the only time we see that, it should be if somebody dies or if they give a permanent change of address out of the state of Louisiana.
If you could, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest level of confidence, and 1 being the least, this is probably a question for Belden or Eileen, how confident are you that next Wednesday you're going to meet the deadline with the required number of signatures on a scale of 1 to 10?
Very,
10? 9?
very.
10. 10.
Everyone who's on the fence, sign,
It has been a lot of motivation.
sign.
It has been a huge effort in these last couple of weeks, and I think everybody is very pleased to see the momentum coming out of the city at this point.
Of the people you think should be on the inactive list, can you give us a breakdown of how many of those are Republicans or Democrats and how many are black or white?
No, I cannot. You know, this has been very quickly moving to get this filed in time so that it's ahead of that Wednesday deadline, but we didn't even, I mean, to be honest, that never even came up in any conversation. We never asked what party anybody was affiliated with or anything of that nature. It simply doesn't matter. They're either active or inactive. You will see that specific examples are pulled and listed in the petition, and I believe those examples will tell you party affiliation because they come straight from the Secretary of State's website. But other than that, there hasn't been any discussion because it doesn't matter for purposes of this mandamus.
You all hired a company, I think, to do this. I think it was Gulf Coast. This is probably a broader picture question, but is it surprising to you that dead people, allegedly, and people who left the state are still on the active voter rolls in Orleans Parish? Do you think it's the same in other parishes too?
I will say it was surprising to me, but then we later learned it was not surprising to people who are working within the system, essentially. They seem to say this is an ongoing problem, getting the records cleaned and accurate. I know a few years ago, it was centralized, the database was centralized, so now the Secretary of State, all data goes from the registrars of each individual parish through the Secretary of State. So we see an effort to sort of get this under control, but then at the same time, we see people who died decades ago still listed as active. So, you know, it shocks me, but I guess I should say that it seems to be a problem that is permeating, to what I know right now, Orleans Parish, could be other parishes. I have no idea.
Do you all expect, if you do get the signatures by next Wednesday and turn them in, do you expect any legal challenges from the mayor or a proxy for the mayor trying to take out any kind of TRO to block anything? This is probably another question for you, Eileen.
We're prepared for everything. So, I mean, I'm a strategist. We strategize. That's what we do. I'm prepared for everything that comes to us. And I mean, I think you've seen that we've been well organized, and our communication style has been pretty straightforward, you know, since the beginning of this. So we're prepared for anything.
You guys said a few days ago you were about 1,029 signatures away from that goal. I know you guys were counting again within yesterday and today. Is there any update on that number?
We'll see when I get this number, I'll be able to give y'all a better number. And that's the entire point of this. We're getting to a point where this number can't be hazy. We need to know exactly where it is. And so, you know, our attorneys have been wonderful in helping us present this. So.
Do you believe if they change the inactive versus active, that might change some of those signatures as well and that count? Because if someone's inactive and signing that petition?
Not with our process. We go through the QR code, and you won't even be able to pop up if you're inactive. There's a bar that says, a red bar that says you're inactive.
Right.
And so we've actually done the opposite. We've
That's
actually
right.
encouraged people to make sure they are active when they come up to the pop-up and, you know, show us that. And so we've been walking them through the other process, the opposite side. So that's why we see this as a problem across the board.
Essentially, their vetting process is more rigorous than is required to actually vote in an election, which they are vetting these before they submit.
Is there a court hearing set?
Oh, yes. It is set for Monday right now, and the legal requirement is that a hearing be held within 10 days of service. So Monday would be the date, assuming service goes out today. Now, remember, there are parties that have to be served in Baton Rouge.
Monday the
So,
27th. she's
oh, I'm
referring.
sorry, yes.
After Monday.
I apologize, yes. Nobody's doing anything Monday
Right.
morning. A week from Monday would be the day it's as of now set, but again, that assumes all service gets to Baton Rouge today. So you could see that get kicked a couple of days, but it's a relatively quick process. We would expect to have a hearing within a couple of weeks.
What judge was it assigned to?
Judge Medley, Section F. All right, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are y'all paying for lunch at Celtic for everybody?
Yeah.
Sandwiches?